Welcome to the INC-3 Global Treaty Navigator. I'm Dave Ford. I am the founder of OPLN, and on behalf of our entire team, we're just so grateful for all of you to join. Megan, can you advance the slide for me? So welcome everyone. As you join the meeting, if you could please do the following. Please mute yourself, just that way we have some we have the ability to, we don't have to mute you if we need to. Please turn your video on if you can. We'd really appreciate to see your faces, even if it's just for a moment. Realize you might not be able to have your video on the entire time. Get comfortable. You can see the chat box. There should be a lot of activity in the chat box. It's a great place for you to share questions, comments, and otherwise we do ask that you be respectful. There are we'll talk a bit about sort of the philosophy of OPLN and how we work across the entire value chain in many organizations that don't necessarily see eye to eye. But we just ask that you be respectful in the chat, but we'd love to hear from you. And please click on those three little dots in the upper right-hand corner of your video and rename yourself so that we know who you are and where you're from. We love it if everyone could just quickly in the chat tell us where you are right now, and if you're going to INC3 in person or not. I can, from the Catskills of New York, a couple hours in New York, north of New York City. Really happy to be here and happy to get started today. So can we go to the next slide, please? So I mentioned I'm Dave Ford. I am the founder of the OPLN, here with our team, Heather Hogan, our executive director, our CEO, Marta Lapata, and Megan Klein, who is running everything behind the scenes that you're seeing right now. So thank you so much to everyone. Next slide, please. And just a bit about the Ocean Plastics Leadership Network. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, we have been, our 5-year anniversary. This organization started in the middle of the Atlantic garbage patch, May of 2019, where we brought activists and industry together in one of the world's 5 gyres. And that spirit is how we've grown ever since, bringing all sides of the table together. We are a neutral convener, so we do not take advocacy positions, but we bring together voices across industry, activism, and government to drive progress on effective treaties, interventions, and protocols on behalf of the plastics crisis globally. We're here to help everyone learn from each other so we can move faster. We have worked with over 400 organizations, 79 activations, 7 countries, 7,000 capacity building hours. We're doing the neutral convening for the United Kingdom government. That is been taking place over the course of the last 2 years. And together, our goal and our mission is for all of us to learn to each other, to accelerate progress and move faster. Next slide, please. We'd like to take this opportunity to thank our supporting partners for the Global Treaty Dialogues, SAP and Accenture. SAP and Accenture share a commitment to a sustainable future through technology and human ingenuity. They are committed to delivering the digital solutions and innovation needed to enable the goals of this treaty at scale. And just a quick disclaimer, supporting partners do not influence Global Treaty Dialogues, programming, considerations, agenda, or participation framework. And we would just like to say, I'll give a warm thanks to SAP and Accenture for making this program possible. Across the ecosystem, across a vast variety of opinions, and many of which think this treaty should operate in a very different way. And if you look through the participants of the folks that are here today, you'll get that very quickly. I mean, whether it's research and academia, civil society, waste management, the informal sector, small, medium-sized businesses, consumer goods, petrochemical, agriculture, manufacturing, and producers. One of the greatest challenges of this crisis is just how incredibly complex and how many stakeholders are at the table. And it's our goal to, again, help just synergize everyone that is all these different stakeholder groups so that we can just move faster together. So So going back to the last time, the world went to Kenya, it was UNEA 5.2, and we do think this is a good time to just root into the mandate that started negotiations. So that this treaty be legally binding, that it consider the full life cycle of plastics, that it promotes sustainable production of plastics, that it acknowledges plastics' potential risk to human health. We will have a human health will be a topic of today's session, and recognizing the role of waste pickers and informal workers in solving the plastics crisis. And just to root everybody in on the plastics treaty roadmap, we started this journey a year ago in Punta del Este in Uruguay. In May, we were in Paris, and we are all descending again to Kenya next week for INC-3. This is going to be the first INC since the zero draft was introduced. We'll go into that in depth today. And again, the goal of the INC is for us to have a treaty to ratify in mid-2025. So we are all holding that spirit, and that is going to be possible, and also putting a great deal of hope that a lot of progress happens next week in Kenya. And at this point, I'm very excited to introduce our executive director, Ms. Heather Hogan, who is going to deep dive into what's going to be happening next week for all of you.
Thank you so much, Dave. And I'll be fair, it's not much of a deep dive, but more of a mile-high overview of what we can expect. So actually, the events are going to kick off this weekend. Things are happening right now. Next slide, please. The first official meeting will be on Saturday, which is a preparatory meeting to allow member states to review intersessional work, primarily on setting out principles, scope of work, as well as definitions. Then there is time reserved on Sunday for regional consultations, and then INC-3 officially gets started on Monday with the opening plenary. The chair of the Secretariat has released a provisional agenda, which lays out the ambition for Monday to cover rules of procedures, the adoption of the agenda, organization of work for the week, summary of the preparatory meeting, and then an opportunity for members and observers to provide remarks on the zero draft, which has been circulated since INC2. And then the establishment of contact groups. And these contact groups will be the main point of where substantive items are negotiated throughout the session. So Tuesday, and this is a provisional agenda. So this is all things going well, and the group can keep to speed, which might not be the case. But in the perfect scenario, by Tuesday, contact groups will already be engaging to discuss substantive issues from the zero draft that's been provided by the chair and the secretariat. Then on Thursday, the group will resume, Thursday afternoon, will resume in a stock-taking plenary to review the work to date and to agree on a way forward for the rest of the session. So Friday and Saturday, contact groups will continue to meet. And then on Sunday, the session will officially close with a plenary where the contact groups will produce or present their key outputs and recommendations. There will be agreement on the session report, discussion on the logistics for future sessions, as well as INC4 agenda, which is scheduled for April in Ottawa, Canada, and then the election of officers and other matters. So these contact groups are really very central to the development of the draft text itself. Currently, the chair has proposed the development of 3 contact groups, which ultimately the INC will vote and decide. So preliminary, we're looking at 3 contact groups. Contact group 1 really jumping into the elements, which many feel is really the substantive part of the draft text. Contact group 2 is largely covering control measures, and then contact group 3 looking at governance. Next slide, please. So what are these elements and control measures? The zero draft has been provided by the INC Secretariat. It's currently available in the 6 official UN languages. You can check in the chat box, and there'll be links to these documents, so you can review them yourself. But the elements in the draft is section 2, and it covers 14 key elements that the treaty may include, covering everything from primary plastic polymers to chemicals and polymers of concern, problematic and avoidable plastic products. And I won't go through the whole list here, but going all the way down to waste management, dealing with existing plastic pollution or legacy pollution, just transition, and then transparency, tracking, monitoring, and labeling. And then in addition, the draft lays out means of implementation, which largely includes financing, capacity building, national action plans, implementation and compliance, as well as information exchange, awareness raising, and education and stakeholder engagement. So these are the core contents of the Working Zero draft and what the contact groups will be focused on. So it's a lot of information that's been provided since INC2 and getting us prepared for INC3. But we've taken the effort to distill some of the really key insights and new things that we're seeing in the Zero draft. It's a bit exciting and a surprise. So one, the Zero draft is presenting a menu of options that does not prejudge the negotiations to come. So this is really important. What we have here is really a Zero draft, and this could fundamentally change over the next year and a half as the negotiations continue. But a couple important notes: microplastics reallocation to a new provision. So really giving a lot of prominence and focus to the issue of microplastics. There's also an explicit reference to reuse systems and the role that they play upstream in curbing plastic pollution, or really, what we heard at UNEA 5.2 is turning off the tap. There's a lot of focus on stable, predictable financing, specifically through inclusion of EPR as a full measure, inclusion of strong trade measures, including on plastic waste trade, and then production remains squarely in scope. So that's it for a quick high-level overview of the Zero draft and what's to come at INC3. And now we're really excited to have the opportunity to hear directly from 3 stakeholder groups that provided INC3 pre-session submissions, and to hear from them their perspectives on the Zero draft and expectations for INC3. So we are joined by Sarah Neelan, the European Green Deal Advisor to the European Union, Carlos Fili, President of the International Solid Waste Association, and Kate Bailey, Chief Policy Officer of the Association of Plastic Recyclers. Thank you all very much for joining. And we'll just get directly started with Ms. Sarah Neelan. So formerly, Sarah was the Deputy Head of Cabinet for the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans, as well as formerly Head of Unit for the Waste Unit in DG Environment of the European Commission. And she is a very experienced waste management, circular economy expert and a part of the INC3 team. And Sarah, we're really honored to welcome you to the call.
Thank you, Heather. Can you all hear me well?
Loud and clear.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to have the occasion to give a bit of European perspective on the negotiations that will start soon. I myself am leaving on Friday to Nairobi to start to work in the weekend. As you know, Europe has an ambitious approach to plastic pollution. It is an issue where already 5 years ago in the EU we adopted the plastic strategy in 2018, and since then we followed up with legislation such as on single-use plastic, but also related issues, microplastics, etc. It is a problem where you have health dimensions, environment dimensions, and of course an economic dimension where we try to find a good balance and ambitious solutions. Now, with what is upcoming in Nairobi, let me start by saying that we believe that the Zero draft whatever the name, puts us really on the right track to reach an agreement by the end of next year, as is foreseen, and we are committed to reach that deadline. The options, as Heather referred to already as well, put forward by the chair on elements for this future treaty, they really reflect a menu with all the different views that we have heard so far. And we as an EU have identified many proposals that we do like. We find it balanced and provides a good basis for constructive discussions at the negotiation committee next week. Most options that the EU has been advocating for are in the text, but still in many cases require further adjustments and further clarity, especially on how such obligations will be operationalized and made more concrete to really have impact on the ground. So this is the work that will start now, and we are committed to contribute in a meaningful way to achieve that. As an EU, we would really like to see legally binding obligations at each step of the plastics life cycle. Legally binding and concrete, because we do not want to fight plastic pollution with paper tigers, but with real measures that have impact on pollution. So when we say the whole life cycle, it means restrictions on production of primary plastic polymers. It means eliminating chemicals and polymers of concern, as well as avoidable plastic products for which there are alternatives. Product design obligations and design requirements, and important as well, reuse and refill schemes, which, if we talk in terms of the waste hierarchy, reuse is really on top of that before recycling, etc. And as well, instruments as EPR and some other provisions, of course, just to give an idea of things that we really would like to see reflected. Concretely, for the work that is upcoming, we have two broad priorities. First, I would say that we aim for a consolidation of the options and a reduction of some in the text, so that we really build the ground for negotiations in Canada next year. It's extremely important to progress in this sense. Otherwise, it will be difficult to meet the deadline of concluding the negotiations end of next year. So that's why we really like to go to consolidation and reduction of options. And second priority, as we see it, we also will want to make sure that the negotiation committee agrees on a clear mandate for intersessional work on technical issues. We do not have time nor the right experts to discuss technical details and during these meetings. So we really need to prioritize and give a clear mandate on what should happen intersessionally. And there as well, we don't have unlimited efforts or experts and resources for during the sessions. We need to come to clear priorities. Intersessionally, there are many areas we could work on, but as we see it, we would at least want to see work on product design criteria and chemicals and polymers of concern. This intersessional period provides the right place for understanding more what is at stake in terms of these technical details, and we should have the conversations there on how to frame issues in the treaty text afterwards. To achieve this, it's important not to delay discussions on substance. We really want them to happen now and soon. And this leads me as well to perhaps a final point that we need to avoid the scenario of last time where we got stuck on procedural issues for almost 3 full days. That would not be helpful. We don't want to, or we don't see a need to reopen rules of procedure, and we really want to not to risk further delays because the time is short. With that, I want to just reassure and say that we are confident for what is coming up. As an EU, we will be active and constructive as participant in the preparatory work, and including, for instance, the work where we discuss the scope and principles. Thank you for your attention.
Sarah, thank you so much for sharing the EU's perspective and ambition. That's really helpful and inspiring. And I think we all echo the very strong desire that we not get caught up in procedural matters again and move forward with the work. So let's see if we're able to achieve that. Next, I would like to call on Carlos Fili, President of the International Solid Waste Association since 2020, an attorney at law on administrative and economic regulation, author of the book Solid Waste, What the Law Says, and several articles on the subject. With rich experience dealing with issues of closure of dump sites, mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions, marine litter, planning and regulation, and extensive experience working in Latin America on the same. We're really excited to have you, Carlos, to share your experience on solid waste and the role that it plays in eliminating plastic pollution. So, Carlos, over to you.
Thank you very much, Heather, and thank you also to Dave for this invitation. And I'm really honored to join this session and see many colleagues from around the world and having this like a different backgrounds, but I'm sure that we all share the same objective. It's to achieve a legally binding instrument to beat plastic pollution, or if I may say, to beat pollution, one of like the threats that we are facing on this current planetary crisis we are facing. So we are all considering, I would say, we are all navigating towards the same objective, but there are many interests, many backgrounds, many positions around the table, and I agree that we need to combine all those and like put aside procedural matters and really go to the substance part of this negotiation and aiming at this legally binding instrument. We still don't know if it will be a treaty, an agreement, a convention. It will be part of the negotiations, but for sure we need to consider, we need to contribute with this content, this substantial part of the document. For us, on behalf of ISWA, the International Solid Waste Association, the global network for waste management and resources management towards a circular economy, a starting point and a necessary step for a successful instrument to beat plastic pollution can only come with reliable sound waste management systems. For us, it's a key step towards transitioning to a circular economy. So one very important topic for us is to consider integrated waste management approach, prioritizing upstream initiatives. So as to say that the instrument should bring minimum requirements for safe and sound waste management, considering the waste hierarchy principle, truly circular economy models, and clear EPR schemes and eco-design for plastic packaging and products. A second point for us is to tailor these measures to local conditions, because this is one thing we are all heading to this INC process, like until INC 5. We are all discussing these matters, but we need to understand at the end, anything that is decided there must be implemented at the local level. So given the sector's specificity and the large variations in waste management maturity and its dependence on local practices and characteristics, it prevents a one-size-fits-all approach. Therefore, the development of targets, measurement of baselines and achievements should really consider national conditions and local capacities. For this to happen, we need to ensure that the right or a robust governance and financing systems are in place. So we consider that the instrument should include financial tools to address the current gaps and achieve ideal conditions, considering the possibility to enable development of effective regulatory frameworks and the enforcement of these frameworks, because we have several researches showing that there are frameworks in place, there are regulations in place, but unfortunately, in many cases, they are not really enforced or they are not really implemented. And last but not least, we need to consider a knowledge sharing system or a knowledge sharing platform with global education campaigns, with cross-generational engagement, to exchange experiences, networking, and mobilization, such as OPLN develops currently towards an effective implementation of this instrument. So from our side, we need really to address these poor or absent conditions in terms of solid waste management services and infrastructure worldwide, and really bring this kind of like another level, because we consider this as either basic human right and key element to beat plastic pollution or to beat pollution at all. So thank you very much, and looking forward to future contributions.
Carlos, thank you so much. I grabbed so much from your talk there. Integrated solid waste management infrastructure is a key priority and as a basic human right. The need to secure sustainable, reliable financing, to tailor approaches for the local level, and robust opportunities for experience change across the country. Thank you very much for that. I want to make a quick reminder to the audience that we will have a few minutes available to have a Q&A with the different panelists. So if you have questions, kindly put them in the chat box and we'll be screening those. And then in just a minute, we'll open up a Q&A. So Carlos, thank you very much. And I'm really pleased to now invite the third and final panelist for this first session, Ms. Kate Bailey, the Chief Policy Officer for the Association of Plastic Recyclers, or APR. Kate, or APR, or Association of Plastic Recyclers, is an international nonprofit organization, the only North American organization focused exclusively on improving the recycling of plastics. Kate has successfully worked with local and state governments, consumer goods companies, NGOs, and other stakeholders to pass several leading policies to improve recycling across the United States. Kate, what a pleasure to welcome you and gain from your experience. Over to you.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you to the entire OPLN team for having me today and for convening this dialogue for this really once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to drive systemic change to end plastic pollution. Megan, I have some slides. Thank you very much on it. Really honored to be here today on behalf of the Association of Plastic Recyclers and really speak from the recycling perspective. It is critical for this treaty to succeed, to really be based on what we know works on the ground, how companies are operating every day, and the ways we need to scale things moving forward. So the Association of Plastic Recyclers represents the companies that are managing plastics and recycling them every day, millions of pounds. We buy your bottles, your yogurt containers, your milk jugs, etc. We wash them, flake them, grind them, and we make them into recycled plastic pellets, recycled plastic flakes that replace the need for virgin plastic. So we're going to talk today is, I'm going to dive a little bit more specifically than some of the other panelists into what we see as a really core criteria of the treaty, and that is the design for recyclability standards. So apologize, my text ended up a little small there, but I want to drive home a really important point to start with, which is why we recycle. When we think about the treaty itself has recognized the role of recycling as part of the solution to end plastics pollution. And really, I think that is a pivotal moment to recognize that recycling does play a strong role, although it will not solve the problem in and of itself. It's part of that comprehensive suite of tools. But in order to scale recycling, we need to think about why it is we recycle in the first place. And I hear a lot that recyclers are trying to keep things out of landfill. And that implies that their job is to manage waste. And I really want to counteract that notion that recyclers do not manage waste. They do not manage plastic waste. The role of recyclers is to produce quality feedstocks to be used in manufacturing new products. Recyclers are first and foremost selling a product, a recycled material, to companies to replace virgin products. And that is the fundamental role of recycling, and that's how recycling works as a business. In order to make that work, when we think about it from a quality feedstock perspective, really try to come down to the importance of design, that good recycling has to start with good product design. Recyclers are very reactive to the materials that are coming to them. Materials must be designed for recyclers to handle them. And that builds upon the work that we have done at APR for decades. So next slide, please. APR has a design guide for plastics recyclability that we think is essential as a foundation for the treaty, along with other similar tools, to really build upon what we know works on the ground. I think the effective treaty really is scaling up proven solutions and moving from voluntary measures to mandatory measures to make recycled plastic a safe and sustainable replacement for virgin plastic. So the APR design guide really connects the packaging designers with the recycling system. It looks at every step of the package, every component of the package as an individual element. So it helps the package engineer understand how the choice of plastic, the color, the label, the cap, all of those components will influence how or if the plastic is able to be recycled. So APR provides guidance on each of these elements. I use the example of the plastic bottle in this graphic, but we also include both rigid and flexible packaging formats as well. And then each component is evaluated, next slide please, into three categories. Essentially, there is preferred. So my color scheme got a little screwed up here. Preferred on the left should be green. Preferred for recycling means it is the highest quality recycled product. So the product is effectively designed for recycling, which means we can use it very well to replace virgin plastics. The second category, which should be in yellow, is tolerated but needs improvement, meaning the plastic product is recyclable, but there's a component that makes it detrimental. Either it causes things like yellowing or less yield in the plastic, something that we want to improve the design in order to make recycled plastic a better alternative to virgin plastic. And then the last category, which should be in red, evaluates whether the product is non-recyclable because of some element of the design. Next slide, please. So APR has worked with dozens of multinational companies on the APR design guide and incorporating these criteria into packaging design. We offer in-person all-day trainings. All of these dozens of companies have taken these trainings. In some cases, we have had hundreds of packaging engineers in the room really diving in deep to understand how package design influences recyclability. This is great. These companies have done some great work. However, this is still a voluntary program, and we still see a lot of poor design out there on the market. And to really see the treaty as an opportunity to scale up some of these working solutions to make them something that's more globally harmonized, globally accepted, so that we can really improve the quality of the recycling system as a replacement for virgin plastics. So last slide, I just want to highlight the work of APR also to harmonize our design guide around the globe. So 50% of our website traffic comes from outside of the US. We have translated the guide into both Spanish and Chinese. We also have a working relationship and working MOU with Plastics Recyclers Europe to harmonize our testing protocols. So if you're approved in Europe, you're approved in North America and vice versa. So really wanting to highlight that a lot of this work has already been underway. It needs to be accelerated. It needs to be scaled up. We're very excited to see design for circularity as a key element of the treaty, and particularly the call out for the technical annex. This is evolving, very dynamic work. So having some good language in the treaty and then the technical annex platform to strengthen and refine these criteria over time, we feel is the best approach. So with that, I will wrap up on the importance of design for recycling. Thank you for taking the time to hear from the recyclers, and thank all of you for being here, not just on this webinar, but in general to take part of this really unprecedented, once in a lifetime opportunity for us moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Kate, so much. There was a lot to unpack there and really valuable insight, but the key thing I'm walking away from is that the role of recyclers is not to manage waste, it's to produce feedstock for the production of new products. So I think that's really powerful reframing, and thank you for sharing that with us. Quick reminder to the audience, we have about 10 minutes now that we'll take a few Q&As with these three panelists. So I invite you to drop your questions here in the chat box. But I'd like to get started just directly with you, Kate, if that's okay. Someone asked how the APR guidelines respond and compare to other existing design guidelines, such as the Consumer Goods Forum Golden Design Rules.
Great question. So there's a lot of great work happening on design. There's the APR design guide, there's the Consumer Goods Forums, there's Reciclass, which is the Plastics Europe standard. I think that the APR work is the most technically grounded. So it is very detailed. It's really meant for packaging engineers to go component by component to understand the resin, the adhesive, the label. Some of the work from the Consumer Goods Forum, the Golden Design Rules, I think of as a little bit broader messaging. It has some steps that are less technical, things about reducing packaging headspace, for example. So there's sort of like a broad overview in some of those spaces of how to reduce packaging waste and packaging design, but the APR design guide is really dials into those technical details. And then I think the other thing that helps APR really stand apart, and I think is a good global model, is that our guidelines are set by technical committees. So the technical committee is based on the recyclers, the brand owners, the packaging converters. This is a consensus-driven platform where people are coming together to evaluate new product innovations on the market, new recycling systems, and really from the ground up, from a technical perspective, decide how guidelines are set.
I think that's crystal clear. Thank you. Carlos, I'm going to send the next question over to you, and I'm going to package two together that came in the chat box from participants, and I think they're quite similar. I'm really looking at, how to adapt to national approaches given the local context, which you spoke about. And so one question was, what recommendations do you have to build recovery infrastructure in regions that do not yet have robust systems today? And I might add a little bit of my own color here, don't have robust waste management systems. Can we leapfrog and build recovery systems? And do you have recommendations on that? And then a similar and complementary question is, do you think that nations should be allowed to set their own targets and timelines?
Thank you, Heather. Thank you for the very good questions from the chat. I would say, first, we really need to give all these stakeholders, I would say, enough confidence that these gaps or these challenges can really be resolved by building on existing resources and expertise. And the ISVA network is here to really provide support, to really provide this knowledge sharing and successful cases on how to build and how to overcome these challenges. And considering, as I said, that the instrument really needs to include a firm reference to ensure access for all to adequate waste collection, this is the basic entry point. We have billions of people nowadays in the world without access to basic waste collection. And when you don't have basic waste collection, you have waste leakages and you have plastic leakages to water bodies, to the soil, and many flying plastics elsewhere. So we need to ensure this basic collection system and the waste management, treatment, and recovery facility as part of the basic services. So I would say, as a practical recommendation, it would be the entry point would be mapping local resources in terms of quantity and type of waste generated by residents, by establishments, by businesses, and map also the existing facilities in the region or in the country in order to really access how it's already available. And then once we know the baseline, we can address the challenges with the right solutions. Also, I would say we need to have these waste management funding schemes as mandatory through a combination of waste generator or user fees and extended producer responsibility schemes. Without the adequate funding, we cannot really provide adequate infrastructure and adequate continued operations. So we need to bring this polluter pays principle into practice worldwide, and the polluter pays principle is really based on you need to pay for what you generate as waste, and we need to pay from the type of products we consume. So this would be, on our perspective, the two basic entry points in order to start solving the waste crisis that we have nowadays.
Thanks, Carlos. Sarah, the EU and its 27 member states INC-3 pre-session submission also talks about the polluter pays principle and why this is critical for an effective treaty. And of course, the EU has quite robust experience with EPR, which your submission directly calls out. Can you share with us some key insights on what makes EPR work, from designing, implementing, and then kind of connecting with Carlos' point on needing to adapt to local context? Can EPR be effective in places that have weaker regulatory environments to enforce and management, and many best practices that you might be able to share?
Thank you for that question. And indeed, the polluter pays principle is something that we have inbuilt in our environmental policies for some time, and through this tool of EPR for a while as well. And we have reinforced it as regards, for instance, the single-use plastic legislation that we have now, that it has been extended to more products, also for cigarettes, which is also high up in the number of most littered items, well, not only in Europe, this is global, but so we have reinforced it, and we have experience from other products in the past that it is a useful instrument. It's a financing instrument to manage waste and resources, but indeed it is we have differences between the efficiency between our different member states. Some have more centralized systems of EPR, some allow different systems within one member states, very different ones. We have left that a bit open in how it's organized locally. In that sense, also globally, there is margin imagine also in states where well, there is not one size fits all model, but of course there are lessons to learn, and in that sense it is good to be in touch with experienced countries, best practices, etc. I think, for instance, in Europe, Belgium is also seen as one of the examples where it works well, and we have done that in the EU to have member states with a system that is very efficient, etc. Talk to others, to learn from each other, etc. Now, your question on is this implementable in those countries where administratively, etc., there is a weaker system. I think there everything is a bit more difficult. Let's face it, but it's not excluded. I think it is workable. It is also something where well, private sector plays a role, and I think our ambition should definitely be to try to have this implemented in as many countries as possible as a tool for effective waste management.
Thank you very much, Sarah. We've just got 2 more minutes, but Kate, I want to throw one last question to you, and it connects with this interesting discussion that's happening in the chat box around non-intentionally added substances in Recycle It. And I know that APR and many other stakeholders are calling for banning of potentially hazardous substances or chemicals as well as polymers. And so I want to ask you, in the theoretical future environment where these hazardous substances have been eliminated from the product availability on the market, how do you foresee that being able to impact the volume of recycling in the US, but also internationally?
Yeah, thanks for the question, and thanks for the great chat, having fun over there answering some questions. Recycling, I really think of it as akin to cooking. It's a recipe. You need to have quality ingredients coming in order to make a quality product coming out. So it is critical that we eliminate the hazardous substances, that we design out formats that are just not compatible with our recycling system. We have to move from what is technically recyclable, which is almost anything could in theory be recyclable. We need to focus on what is recyclable in practice and at scale, and use our limited resources to scale up those materials as quickly as possible. That starts with good design, that starts with EPR for packaging, that also starts with recycled content mandates so that companies are using recycled content in place of virgin materials. So there's a lot of work to be done, and really from a recycler perspective, we are thinking both about volume and we are also thinking about quality. So that's where those hazardous substances come into kind of both of those. And of course, we want and need to make recycled content, recycled plastics safe in order to make it a viable alternative to virgin plastics. So that all comes back to getting those materials, those chemicals, those formats of concern out in the design phase of the product life cycle.
Thank you very much. It's a powerful ending, and it's a really great segue to our next round of panelists to give us more insight on what is the human health impact of plastic pollution and chemicals of concern, as well as the human rights approach to this issue. So I'm happy to call on my founder, Dave Ford, to lead this next session. Dave.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, we are so excited to welcome Lisa and Pete for this next session. I'll give Lisa Koper-Kwaluk, ICC Canada President for ICC International Vice Chair. Lisa Koper-Kwaluk was born in northern Quebec, Canada. Lisa's the president of the ICC Canada and vice chair of Inuit Circumpolar Council. She advocates for Inuit and self-determination and pushes for political, economic autonomy, social justice, and protection of the environment, culture, and language through equitable inclusion of Inuit knowledge in research and decision-making. I am honored to invite Lisa to share her thoughts and perspectives with us.
Well, thank you, David, for this wonderful introduction. I really appreciate being part of this panel and to be able to share with you the work, the advocacy that we do for our fellow Inuit. While I wait for the presentation to be put up, I can let you know that we Inuit, we live in 4 different countries. So that's off of Canada, the United States, in Greenland, which is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, and as well as Chukotka in Russia. So we at ICC represent over 180,000 Inuit and unite these Inuit with one voice and pushing for our participation and the equitable use of our knowledge through international organizations. For example, we are permanent participants to the Arctic Council, and we are also observers at the United Nations. So we've been observing the Arctic as the Arctic inhabitants for millennia through our direct involvement of our environment. Next slide, please. We Inuit are already severely impacted by climate change and chemicals which enter our environment, bioaccumulate in organisms, biomagnify in the food web, and are eventually taken up by us, causing health concerns for ourselves and the environment, including the animals we depend on. You may already have heard that even our pregnant mothers must avoid eating our country food, which we often take for granted and that we consider healthy food. Plastic contamination is adding another level of stress on top of the stressors we already experience. Other multilateral environmental agreements, such as the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants and the Minamata Convention on Mercury, already recognize Indigenous peoples and the Arctic as particularly vulnerable. The current Zero draft document is a good start to form the basis of the negotiations. However, some of the options provided are not going to be helpful in our point of view. We will need strong actions that turn off the tap and prevent contaminants to reach the environment in the first place. Therefore, provisions need to clearly outline requirements to parties and reference to annexes where baselines, timeframes, and targets are specified. ICC does not support weak language that refers to party-specific goals outlined in national plans. ICC also prefers to require parties to eliminate plastics and plastic products. Currently, there's no multilateral environmental agreement that recognizes the importance of a human rights approach. We do have examples in the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants and the Minamata Convention on Mercury that recognize the particular vulnerability of the Arctic indigenous communities. And the UNFCCC and the Convention on Biological Diversity outline the need to work with Indigenous peoples and to recognize Indigenous knowledge. There's also another international agreement that also has a provision on including Indigenous knowledge, and that is the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement that's been signed by 10 countries internationally. However, ICC believes that human rights need to be built into the operative text of the treaty. This should start with outlining the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as adopted by the UN General Assembly in 28 July 2022. ICC believes that the objective of the treaty needs to recognize the basic human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as adopted by the UN General Assembly. Many of the possible provisions of the treaty will have relevance to human rights. This includes the impact that plastic production can have on human and environmental health, particularly due to effects of pollution. Similarly, alternative plastic products would need to consider potential for impacts on human rights, including food security, environmental, economic, social, and human health. Waste management will need to adhere to human rights practices. And I must say that I really understood that link with the need to take into account the local and national practices for minimum safe and environmentally sound collection, recycling and disposal rates, and waste management practices that negatively impact human rights should not be allowed. You know, I must say here that waste management is specifically important for us in our remote communities because we do take in a lot of plastics, a lot of containers that bring in products from the south to Inuit Nunat, our homeland. And we don't have any recycling facilities, and we don't have ways or management practices for reducing plastic use or removing plastics from our remote communities. ICC believes that a provision to measure the effectiveness of the treaty will also be needed, and this provision should include a report on human rights impacts of plastics, which could be prepared by the UN Rapporteur on Human Rights and Toxics and should include Indigenous expertise. ICC also believes that a provision on research and monitoring of plastics will be needed, which considers the best available knowledge, including Indigenous knowledge, and on an equal basis compared to science. We often insist on the use of Indigenous knowledge on an equitable and ethical basis. We do have a document that shows to researchers, to funders, to policymakers on equitable and ethical engagement with Inuit for our Indigenous knowledge. In closing, the global community will need to work together to establish a strong, legally binding treaty on plastic pollution. The treaty text will need to consider the protection of human rights as an objective and will need reference to human rights throughout the provisions of the treaty. Adherence to human rights need to be reviewed on a regular basis as part of the effectiveness evaluation of the treaty. Similarly, a provision on research and monitoring is needed that considers sources, movement, and effects on human health and the environment, and in particular in the Arctic. This work will need to consider the best available knowledge, which should include Indigenous knowledge, Inuit knowledge, and science on an equal basis. Nakomi Marieluk, thank you very much. And very lastly, as a last point, I would like to re-emphasize what I had emphasized at the negotiating committee in Paris, that as Inuit, we may not be a nation state, but we do consider ourselves as a nation, not just a stakeholder, and we belong to the table at the negotiating committee. Nakomik. Thank you.
Lisa, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Personally, I've gotten to spend quite a bit of time in Greenland with Inuit youth in the last few years. So your words really resonate deeply. I just want to highlight some of your key points, particularly around the vulnerability of both the Indigenous communities and the people and ecology of the Arctic regions. Also, the need in a treaty to recognize indigenous knowledge and to have human rights as fundamentally baked into anything that happens at the treaty level. So thank you so much for your words. We really appreciate it. At this point, I would like to call on Dr. John Peterson Myers, the Chief Scientist of Environmental Health Scientists and Adjunct Professor of Chemistry at the Institute for Green Science, Department of Chemistry, Carnegie Mellon University. Pete has worked on the science and policies of endocrine disrupting chemicals since 1990, and he literally coined the term endocrine disruption at a pivotal workshop in 1991. In 2017, he received the Laureate Award for Outstanding Public Service from the Endocrine Society, the world's largest scientific association of endocrinologists, for his leadership. He's the board chair and chief scientist of environmental health services, the adjunct professor of chemistry for the Institute for Green Science at Carnegie Mellon University, the board chair of Science Communication Network in Washington, D.C., a board member of the Food Packaging Forum in Zurich, and a founder and board member of SUDOC. With that, Dr. Myers, excited to bring you up and to hear your thoughts and perspectives. I think you need to unmute, Dr. Myers.
Right, I need to unmute myself, and I did. And I assume everyone can hear me. I want you to think about health every time you think about plastic. Most people think about plastic as a material. It's actually thousands of different recipes for making stuff out of chemicals. Chemicals are the heart of plastic. Now, I'm on the board of a chemical company. I believe in chemicals. We need them, but we don't need all the plastic that we have in the environment today. And I want to second Lisa's strong suggestion that the main point of the treaty has to be to turn off the tap. So if I could have the next slide, please. I want you to look at these diseases. These are today's epidemics of chronic diseases. Look at that list. Many different cancers, breast and prostate cancer, infertility, obesity. All of these are epidemics that are affecting people around the world today. I'm sure that virtually everyone in the audience, as they look at this list, will be able to identify someone in their family or in their small circle of close friends. These epidemic diseases are all linked to plastic. Now, plastic doesn't cause all of the cases, by no means. These are multifactorial diseases, but the science we have today that's been built over the last, especially the last 30 years, implicates chemicals in plastic, different chemicals, different plastics, implicates them in the causation of these diseases and conditions. It's quite extraordinary. If you think about the growth in infertility, for example, that's unfolding around the world today. If I could have the next slide. This is work by a colleague of mine, Shauna Swan, who has written a book about it called Countdown, and published multiple studies in the peer-reviewed literature. That slide isn't showing up as it should, but I'll deal with it anyway. This is the decline in sperm count that has unfolded over the last 50 years. It's been steady until recently, steady at a rate of about 1% per year. Males, all sperm count is male. Male sperm count is down by about 50% over that 5-decade-long period. And Shauna's most recent work, which was published last year, shows that the sperm count decline is accelerating and it's global. And in fact, next slide, I'm wondering what's going to show up here. Next slide, please. No, the way the slides were entered didn't work. Could we go back? What's happening today is that the decline is accelerating. It's getting faster. And it's, as I said, it's global. It's not just United States or Europe or wherever. It's global, and it's particularly going faster in places like China. And if you take this current trend and extrapolate it into the future, we will reach a time sometime around mid-century when most men will not be able to reproduce the old-fashioned way. They will be dependent upon artificial reproduction technologies. That's a shocking figure, and plastic, specific chemicals in plastic are contributing to that decline. The mechanisms that are causing the decline are well established, they're acknowledged, and it's serious. And if we don't turn down and turn off the tap, we've got problems as a species. Could I have the next slide, please? There are ways to get out of this predicament. We need to rethink identifying those uses of plastic that are not necessary. Rethink. Second, we need to redesign the plastic. We heard discussion of redesigning for recycling. Well, that's going to be hard given the current generation of plastics and the numbers of chemicals that are in plastic. There's something like 16,000 known chemicals in plastic, and then there are the non-intentionally added substances which get there without being put on purpose, but there are tens of thousands of those in plastic. This is a real problem. We've got to redesign how we think about making plastic and design against the types of hazardous chemicals that are currently incorporated purposefully in today's plastic. And lastly, we need to reform the system, and that's where this treaty comes into play. The treaty will play a critical role in reforming how we take care of, how we regulate plastics, how we allow some and not others. The extended producer responsibility issue is vital, because if you think about this in terms of what are called externalities, the externalities of plastic, that is, the problems that plastic cause in health and other environmental issues, those costs are not paid for by anyone except for the people receiving the plastic as waste, and also paid for it in terms of healthcare costs because of the health problems that plastic causes. We need to get those externalities paid for by the people who profit from the making and sale of plastic. And they're making billions of dollars in that process, and they're not having to pay for any of those externalities today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Myers. We really appreciate that. Wanted to highlight, some of what you said specifically around endocrine disruption in men and the projections that you highlighted of what could happen with male reproductivity by the turn of the century. Thank you so much for your words and for coming here today, and just really appreciate it. I mean, obviously, human health is one of the 5 tenets that was outlined in UNEA 5.2 when this treaty process kicked off, and all indications are it's going to be very front and center in INC-3. So thank you again. At this time, we do have some time for questions. So if there are any questions that you have, if you could put them in the chat, we'd really appreciate it. I have a few that I'd love to just throw out there as we're getting started. But maybe start with Lisa. So the ICC has developed a guidance document for ethical and equitable engagement. Can you briefly summarize your recommendations for ethical and equitable engagement for the ongoing implementation of the eventual treaty?
Sure. So this document that we prepared a couple of years ago, with the inclusion of Inuit regions, both like from all of our countries, this document was prepared in collaboration and in consultation with our communities. Now, the indigenous knowledge is something that we define altogether, though it can, use different terms. Some people use traditional knowledge, and I often avoid using traditional knowledge. And in fact, I don't even want to see it in treaties. So because there's a risk of people wondering and asking, well, what is traditional knowledge? Well, traditional knowledge is way down from the past. It's for me, if we see traditional knowledge, people might consider it as only very specific type of knowledge that's related to what Inuit used to do in the long ago past. Well, Indigenous knowledge, we define it as being dynamic and living and ongoing. So it never remains the same. Knowledge is ever changing. And it includes generations of experience, generations of observations, and it's passed from generation to generation and continues on in a living and dynamic way. Knowledge changes. But we are the knowledge holders. So when it comes to any types of decisions, any type of research that is being conducted that has to do with the Arctic and our communities and the marine ecosystem and anything that relates to us as Inuit, what we're saying is we participate in the design of research projects. We participate in policy making that have to do with us. And we also consider our knowledge as being equal to any other types of knowledge, and that it is also another type of knowledge that exists. So what we're saying is it's not only Western knowledge that must be the basis of decision-making processes. By acknowledging and recognizing that our knowledge is equal to other types of knowledge, that also brings us to the same level as decision-making tables and negotiations. So that's the crux of it in very short. If you do read our document, it's on our website, Inuit Circumpolar Council, or you can simply Google circumpolar Inuit circumpolar or circumpolar Inuit protocols on equitable and ethical engagement. So it's really, yes.
We can put
yes,
that in right now too to make it easy for everyone.
Sure, I'll write it down.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, perfect. Someone found it. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yes, it's very helpful for all decision makers, policy makers, government, researchers, scientists, and our fellow Inuit. It really guides us in how we can work better together.
Oh, thank you so much. We appreciate that. I have a question for Dr. Myers. Dr. Myers, you published what we would say was a very alarming article last year, providing systemic evidence on migrating and extractable food contact chemicals and how most chemicals detected in food contact materials are not listed for use. Can you just give us sort of an overview of what that means, how that's possible, how that could be helpful in the treaty process?
Well, it's acknowledging the great state of ignorance in which we are today with respect to plastics being used in food packaging. That was a publication of the Food Packaging Forum. I am one of about 15 authors on it. It comes about because there is little, you don't have to reveal the recipe you use when you make plastic. That's the simple part of it. The FDA doesn't require plastic ingredients be summarized with different plastics, and every batch of plastic can be different because of the need to add additives to put in addition to the basic monomer, there are additives added to affect the material characteristics of the plastic, how hard it is, how opaque it is, or what color is it, etc. And those ingredients are put in upstream from the manufacturer of the actual plastic product. They may not even be aware of what the plastic is how it's made or what's in it when they're selling it to you as a consumer or to you as a company that's buying it to put products in. It's the state of regulation of plastic manufacturing is abysmal. And that's one of the things that the treaty must address.
What is your vision with sort of practically how the treaty can address some of these concerns?
Well, that's a tough question because right now it's hard to see what is this. It's very difficult to see how any plastic can be part of a circular economy right now, given the state of the plastic today. We can begin by reducing the complexity of the plastic instead of letting any material, any chemical be put into it. Let's create a list of acceptable chemicals for use in plastic. We don't have that today. It's not being used. That would be a simple beginning.
So transparency sort of is a core first.
Transparency is essential. Also, testing is essential. The Minderoo Foundation just published a big review of some. They looked at about 3,500 different types of plastic, and they found that fewer than 30% of those plastics have been tested for human safety. Fewer than 30%. And the tests for human safety that are done mostly are based upon procedures, methods of testing that are decades old, instead of using today's modern biochemical tools that we have. It's appalling when you dig into what's done to test plastic for safety. It's simply amazing. And here's a good example of how different things might be. The European Food Safety Authority, sort of the FDA of Europe and the EPA of Europe, just revised what they consider to be the safe amount of one of the most abundant plastics used in one of the most abundant chemicals used in plastic, one called bisphenol A or BPA. They looked at new data using current methods from biochemical science compared to old methods, and they realized that the tolerable daily intake, what is safe to be for people to be exposed to, has to be reduced by a factor of 20,000-fold reduction to achieve true safety. That's the abysmal state of estimating what's safe and what's not in plastic. And that's just the first one. That no plastic material has been better studied than bisphenol A. And they just last year realized, wait, we blew it. We've got to reduce the tolerable daily intake, what you and I could be exposed to every day of our life and not have suffer from health harms. It's got to be reduced by a factor of 20,000-fold. That takes BPA off the market for use in food packaging material, for example. And BPA is just one of thousands of chemicals that's being used. Nothing has been tested to the degree that BPA has. And we can expect other changes of the same order of magnitude. Mm-hmm. That's how complicated this is, how challenging it is, and why plastic does not belong in a circular economy.
Thank you, Dr. Myers. Appreciate that. Appreciate the thorough answer. Lisa, we have one more question that just came in for you. So your pre-session submission is a powerful reminder of the guiding principles for sustainable development and the rights of Indigenous people. So two of our favorite principles are the right to the development must be fulfilled so that so as to equitably meet development and environmental needs of present and future generations, and also the precautionary principle. Can you explain what these principles mean to you, to the audience?
Well, if we look at the right to development, we Inuit also have the right to development. But our regions often, have impact benefit agreements for, mining companies and so on. In the Arctic, there are a few mines in operation in Inuit Nunat. But at the same time, we also have to be very careful when we enter into these types of impact and benefit agreements, that our way of life, which is very linked to our environment, our homeland, which is the basis of the very culture, our culture, is not damaged to the point that we cannot maintain our culture. So climate change is absolutely impacting our homeland right now in very serious ways. And the impacts of which do not come from our homeland, they are coming from the exterior. So all the more for us to really participate and have our voice heard. So precautionary principle is really, in fact, taking into account our rights that are clearly defined or clearly described. These are our pre-existing inherent rights in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Our rights to our knowledge, our rights to development, our rights for the protection of our environment, our rights to our homeland, our rights to culture, our rights to self-determination. All of these, I think it's only right that state members who are the decision makers do accept us as being part of the table, as they take into account the UNDRIP. So that link with the right to development is important because that's also part of our right. But at the same time, you know, when we have these products that come in from outside our own regions and the impacts of contamination and plastics, climate change, all of these are coming from outside our regions. So I think that's the first thing that we need to pay attention to when we talk about precautionary principles.
Thank you so much. Really grateful. Thank you again, Lisa Koprkwaluk from the ICC and Dr. Pete Myers from Carnegie Mellon. Thank you, everyone. I think what we want to do today, I mean, obviously, as you guys will scroll through the list of attendees, really a cross-section of the entire plastic ecosystem, from plastic producers to activists working directly against said plastic producers. I think today we're just so grateful for our speakers that could come here, you know, that represent the indigenous communities, science, recyclers, the European Union, one of the biggest catalytic forces in getting this treaty started from the beginning. And we want to end on a note of hope that this can be an incredibly productive week next week. You know, it's interesting if you look at the process of five-day INCs and then a nominating conference of plenipotentiaries to ratify a treaty. We really have 25 days, right? And each of these INCs represent a fifth. And obviously, there's hope for increased intercessional work, and but there's a lot to do, and you know, over 170 governments at the table that have to deeply integrate with so much knowledge from so many different sectors. So, you know, it's our hope and our dream and our vision to just help bridge divides, even if they're, you know, even if some seem unattainable, right? And to learn from each other, right? Across the board, even from groups that you may not see eye to eye on much, there is overlapping Venn diagrams that we find, you know, whether it's on transparency of plastics and what that could look like, and on the reverse side, like making sure that the health, you know, the science behind the health challenges are front and center for all to consider. So, you know, I just, on behalf of the OPLN team, Marta, Heather, Megan, and our broader team, I just want to say thank you so much for coming to this INC Navigator today. We will be doing a wrap up after INC 3 in a similar fashion to really take the what what happened in Nairobi and condense it in a way that's digestible. We'll be making a recording of this, while, we've had, I think at the peak, 150 people here today. We've actually had thousands of people watch these afterwards. So if there's a way to help get your colleagues up to speed on what's going on, the best way in a complicated process and a complicated crisis is just widespread education. So all parties can come to the table to learn, and so that we can make this treaty, like I think Kate summed up earlier. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity, and together we can all seize this day and solve this crisis. So again, on behalf of OPLN, thank you so much for coming today. And Heather just put an inspiring UNEP video in the chat if anybody would like to watch that to sort of close on. But we'll see you on the other side of Nairobi, everyone, and just thank you so much. Have a great day.